My name is Arild. I'm an assistant professor in pedagogy at the Inland Norway University of Applied Science, and a PhD candidate at Oslo Metropolitan University in educational science for teacher education. And as a researcher into philosophy of education, I initially wanted to have a look at fatherhood, tradition, and upbringing, and how that is approached in the Horus Heresy series. Because despite what the memes say about Primarch babies with daddy issues, I think there are a lot of interesting work to be done there, even with the Primarchs that are written almost without a childhood. So I want to look at the First Legion, the Dark Angels, and their Primarch Lionel Johnson, and how that is those themes surrounding that are brought up, and I want to do that with some theoretical approaches, especially from political theorist Hannah Arendt. So, quick recap of the story of Lionel Johnson. Most of you might be aware of, but just as a reminder, Lionel Johnson was the Primarch of the First Legion of Space Marines, and he grew up on a deadly forest planet called Caliban, which was a world with a human population living in a feudal society controlled by an order of monastic knights. These knights regularly ventured out on quests to slay the great beasts of Caliban, warp-tamed creatures that terrorized the population. And after being found as a teenager by a group of knights from a knightly order called the Order, the Lion quickly rose through the ranks, and together with a man called Luther, which will become important, they began a crusade to wipe out the beasts of Caliban and uniting the different knightly orders in like a mini crusade that was finished just before the Emperor arrived with his Great Crusade. After the events of the Horus Heresy, the Lion returned to Caliban, where the garrison, led by Luther, opened fire on their former brothers, and in the battle that followed, Caliban was destroyed, and Johnson and Luther were both mortally wounded. That's like the main storyline that should be familiar to most people. The book I want to look at is the first book to mention the Dark Angels in the Horus Heresy series. It's called Descent of Angel by Mitchell Scanton, and it follows the history of Lionel Johnson and the Order on Caliban from the middle of Johnson's rise to power on that world, through the fusion of the Order and the First Legion into the Dark Angels, and ending in the exile of Luther to Caliban at the start or in the middle portions of the Great Crusade. And the main question the novel seeks to answer is why Luther betrayed Johnson. The intro to that book says that Luther grew jealous of the Lion, for though the two of them had shared in many victories, it was always the Lion who was lauded for their triumphs. Others say Luther grew increasingly bitter at being so much in the Lion's shadow. They say a secret seed of anger was born in Luther's heart in those days, the seed of future hatred. But those who repeat such things are liars. Luther always loved Johnson like a brother. And if taken at face value, this leaves us with the question of, if not those reasons, why did Luther then betray the Lion? And I think viewing, taking a look at the history through this lens of tradition and upbringing, we can approach some answers to that question. As I see it, Descent of Angel has two main themes that are relevant for this. Tradition and deeds worthy of being remembered. So let's start by looking at tradition. Here's an excerpt from like a statement given to the protagonist of the novel, Sahariel, by one of his teachers. And this is an important theme throughout the book. In our view, the most important function of ritual and tradition is not to achieve any effects in the outer world, but to create stability and balance in the inner world of the mind. If tradition has any outer function at all, it is to create a sense of social cohesion. It might almost be described as the glue holding our society together. This view is reiterated multiple times throughout the book, and later in the book, as the Order and the First Legion become the Dark Angels after this fusion, the rituals of the Order has seemingly survived. And this partially gives the traditionalists on Caliban right. Despite the great change, part of that order has survived into the Imperium. So the structure of that organization has survived. The rituals and the traditions create a stability and continuity that means the organization survives. Within academia, we can find a similar view in the writings of political theorist Hannah Arendt. She argues that what allows us to act within a political sphere is the existence of a public realm with a stable and lasting framework. To be able to act in concert with others, we need a solid frameworks of things we have in common, a shared understanding of how the world works. That can be the premise when we ask other people to accept the changes, what we propose as changes in a certain way in a public realm. And according to Arendt, this political realm does not just consist of physical spaces where we meet, but also of culture, language, and shared beliefs that underpin dialogue between people. To be able to discuss and enact change together, we need to have something we can both hold to be true. To Arendt, tradition is part of how that shared world is established and protected. And in fact, she sees the rejections of traditions in modernity as part of what lays the groundwork for the rise of totalitarianism in the 20th century. When new generations enter society, they will want to change the world that they become part of, and the role of education is to prepare them to do that, while at the same time instilling in them a respect for tradition that makes sure that there is a continuation of society. Whether you agree with Arendt on this or not, this is clearly the view on tradition held by the order on Caliban. As new initiates into the order progress through the ranks to eventually become full knights, they are asked to take part in rituals where they must walk in spiral patterns on the floor, while the senior members of the order take on appointed roles in that ritual. One of those roles is the Lord Cypher, this character, the picture here, which would probably be familiar to most people. And this role is so important to the traditions of the order that the holder must shed all other identities completely. There should be nothing new about the Lord Cypher, only the continuation of tradition. So the new Lord Cypher should be exactly the same as the old one. What's interesting about this viewing the structure of Caliban and the culture there through this view on tradition is that the lion is presented in opposition to it. He reflects well, first off, he is the person responsible for the crusade to wipe out the beasts on Caliban, and thus ending the knightly tradition of quests. And he also shows that he has little respect for the traditions of the order. Johnson is at some point declared the Grand Master of the Order, and as we've learned from the title of Lord Cypher, that should be a signal that signal a big change for the Lion. The Grand Master of the Order is now who Johnson is, and he should not now take on the role that the previous Grand Master had. To continue that tradition, but he doesn't. He continues his crusade against the beast just as he did before, and he openly reflects that the title is empty. He was still who he was before he got a title, and his real power in the organization hasn't changed in his eye. He also reflects on how tradition puts limits on his ability to change the world. Sometimes I wish it was in my power to wipe the past away, the Lion says. I wish there was no myth of Terra. I wish Caliban had no past. Look at a man without a past, and you will see a free man. This quote clearly puts the Lion in opposition to the traditions of the order and to the order and that the people of Caliban value. And when the Emperor arrives and starts colonizing and terraforming Caliban, that happens with Johnson's support. On a world where the forest plays an important part in the culture and the economy, the importance of this is hard to overstate. This leads to what I consider to be the next important theme of the book, deeds worthy of being remembered. Again, taking the view of Arendt here, this time with her concept of action. Action, according to Arendt, is the part of the active human life where we interact with each other within this political sphere. Through actions, people declare who they are and how they relate to other people and to our common world. As one of the central features of active life, to a certain extent, no human can avoid acting, but in part, action to Arendt is also something that very few people manage to do. To break through the mundanity of everyday life and to do something that has lasting change on the world, and that can be attributed to you, is hard. And in modernity, again, with an interconnected world where most behavior becomes statistically insignificant, this is even harder. On a galactic scale in the grim darkness of the far future, I believe this is even more true. Luther, in Descent of Angels, exemplify this perfectly. Through the book, Luther is portrayed in the shadow of Lionel Johnson. Luther is described as a very competent man, the great knight of the order, but on multiple occasions where this is pointed out, it's directly before or after comments about how much greater the lion is. But Luther never appears to be angry or bitter about this. He shares the lion's dream of eradicating the beasts of Caliban and loves the Primarch as a brother. I would argue that in contrast to bitterness from being overshadowed, an important part of Luther's story is the risk that his deeds will be forgotten. In the first part of the novel on Caliban, this is especially relevant in two important occasions, both relating to the Knights of Lupus, a very traditionalist order of knights in opposition to the order. The Knights of Lupus have been allowed to keep part of the forest free from the Order's crusade, and their territory still contains beasts that they keep to the tradition of going out on quests to slay them, rather than campaigning for their extermination. And although it's never stated outright, it is strongly suggested that Luther and the Knights of Lupus have made some sort of deal, that the crusade was allowed to continue unopposed by the Knights of Lupus, provided that the beasts were allowed to live freely within the territory of the Knights of Lupus. And while the lion is stoic and brooding, Luther is charismatic and a great orator. According to the lion, the crusade would never have happened if not for Luther's skill in persuasion. The Grand Master of the Knights of Lupus states that a promise was made to them, and we can assume that Luther was who made this promise. That makes it important that when Lionel Johnson, in a meeting with the Grand Master, finds the flimsiest pretext possible to break Luther's promise and start a war with the Knights of Lupus. Luther's action, his promise to the Knights of Lupus, are undone and made void. The same happens in the final battle against the last stronghold of the Knights of Lupus. Luther has been given the honor of leading the main assault on the fortress, while the lion takes upon himself to lead a diversionary force. In theory, this should give Luther some honor. It would be his actions that defeat the enemy. But the assault is so successful that even the diversionary forces break through, and the final fight in the Great Hall is concluded when the lion enters with his force. So, to say that the lion's antagonism towards tradition and Luther's inability to make unforgettable acts cause the betrayal is a simplification, but both continue to be relevant in the second half of the book. As Lionel Johnson and Luther take part in the Great Crusade at the head of the Dark Angels Legion, Arild, again the protagonist of this novel, muses that Johnson's flagship is decorated in a way that completely breaks with the traditions of Caliban. Johnson is also shown to not like to be reminded that the First Legion has a history before the Primarch was found. During the compliance of a planet that mirrors pre-imperial Caliban in both ecology and culture, with a strong emphasis on tradition, Luther hesitates to stop an assassination attempt against the lion, and when he is sent back to Caliban in exile, Arild contemplates on the tragedy that their contribution to the Great Crusade had been so small, so insignificant in the scale of what was to come, that Arild doubted that the chroniclers would even bother to record a short war on Sarosh. The Great Crusade would continue without Luther. But as we know, Luther would go on to perform actions that are worthy of being remembered even 10,000 years later. I think this and other analysis like this could shed some insight on the different Space Marine legions and how we view them culturally. Yeah, there's that one. So thanks for listening, and I hope, and I also hope other people could do similar analysis of different Space Marine Legion and their Primarchs. Although I caution the one choosing to do Lorgar, because that is heavy stuff.